Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Station 07.1 Podfix. I'm your host, Rin, and this is a continuation of You're on Your Own, Kid by CastleintheAir1989. This is Chapter 9 Everything You Lose is a Step You Take. Warnings, bullying, and violence. So, the normal, you know the drill. The cold rain soaked his clothing, coating his skin. He shivered, wrapping his arm around himself, his thin hoodie doing nothing to protect him from the cold. He squinted at the paper in his hand, trying to make out the writing illuminated in the dim porch light. Despite shielding it with his hand, a droplet of rain fell on the paper, making the ink bleed. But he was reasonably sure he had the right address. He wasn't sure what he would do if he were wrong. It was late for him to be out, or at least late for a middle schooler who had classes the next day. He hadn't meant for this to happen, but then, a lot of things that happened to Izuku weren't supposed to happen. He double-checked the address again, worry knotting in his stomach. Surely he found the right apartment. But even if he found the correct address, Ozawa-sensei might not be home. Hesitating, he reached out toward the door, his hand shaking, and not only from the cold. Finally, he made up his mind and knocked, curling his arms tighter around himself. While being careful not to brush against his aching ribs, he listened, waiting until he heard footsteps inside move toward the door. The door opened, but instead of revealing Ozawa-sensei, Izuku saw the blonde man Sensei had been with the day before standing in front of him. Izuku gaped at him before realizing he was staring and snapped his mouth shut. "Hey there, little listener. Can I help you with something? I was looking for Ozawa-sensei," he mumbled, shoulder slumping. "Sorry, I didn't know where else to go." "Oh, he's not here right now." Hisashi frowned, and Izuku's heart sank. "Did you want to come in and wait for him?" "No, I'm sorry. I should go." He took a step back, intending to leave. The sky lit up with a flash of lightning and was followed by a roll of thunder that sounded too close for comfort. Izuku shivered at the thought of spending a night out in such a violent storm. "Wait, you don't need to do that. Shota will be back soon," he promised, opening the door wider and stepping aside. "That's okay. I don't want to be any trouble." He could always go home and wait outside for his mom to get back. It wasn't ideal, especially in this weather, but he could stand it for a night. He'd dealt with worse before. "You really should come in and dry off," he insisted, waving Izuku inside. "Shota would have my head if he knew I let you out in this." Longing filled Izuku as he gazed into the warm, dry apartment. The rain still pounding against his skin, and the brightly lit room looked like a heaven. He shouldn't bother this man. Shouldn't really be bothering Ozawa-sensei even. But he was just so tired of being cold and wet and not worth anyone's time that now that Ozawa-sensei had offered his help and had actually given him his phone number and address and told him to come whenever he needed something, Izuku couldn't help wanting to believe him. Surely Ozawa-sensei would be home soon and would be glad Izuku went to him when he was in trouble. Hunching his shoulders, he walked in the apartment. Water pooled beneath his feet, dripping off his hair and running in streams down his arms and legs. The rain had soaked through his clothing, chilling him, and he clamped his jaw together, attempting to stop his chattering teeth. His hands were stiff with the cold, and he struggled with frozen fingers to remove his soggy shoes from his feet. "Sorry, I'm making a mess," he apologized, shoving his hands in his hoodie pocket to hide their shaking. "Don't worry about it, little listener. Wait right here, I'll get you something to dry off with." He turned and walked further into the apartment, returning with some towels and draping one around Izuku. Thanking him, Izuku used the towel to dry off. rubbing it over his hair and doing the best to absorb what water he could from his clothes. "I can get you a change of clothes," Hisashi offered. "That's not necessary." He'd already gone to too much trouble for him. He didn't need to do anything more. "Nonsense. We can't have you freeze before Shota gets home." Not waiting for a response, he ushered him down the hall, stopping briefly in one of the rooms to pull out some clothes, which he handed to him. Izuku reluctantly accepted the bundle, walking into the bathroom to change. As he peeled off his soaken shirt, he noted the bruises ringing around his ribs. It looked about as bad as he expected. Gently prodding his side with an icy hand, he winced. Likely cracked, possibly broken. A ghost of a memory drifted over him, of being surrounded on all sides, huddled on the ground, his attackers kicking him, ignoring his pleading to be left alone. He shouldn't have gone out tonight, with the weather as it was, but he felt so restless, so anxious sitting at home, alone, that he'd slip out for a quick walk. He hadn't expected to run into anyone he knew, much less the same group of high schoolers from the other day. They'd grabbed him, pulling at his hoodie, and he had heard a tearing sound as the pocket ripped in his keys had clattered to the ground. Rough hands had shoved him down until he was forced to cower on the sidewalk before them. A foot to the stomach made him gasp, and he curled up, arms wrapping around his head, trying to shield his face from the worst of the blows. A sharp hit from someone's heel to Izuku's chest had sent a crushing agony through his ribs. The world spun around him as Izuku trembled, dizzy from the pain. A crack of thunder caused some of the group to pause, glancing around nervously at each other. "Hurry it up," one of them mumbled. "We should go before the storm arrives." They turned and began to disperse, and Izuku pushed himself up, grabbing his keys from where they'd fallen, his bruised fingers fumbling to grab the All Might keychain. "What's this?" one of them asked, his eyes narrowing on Izuku's keychain. Izuku froze, a sick feeling growing in his stomach. Another peal of thunder sounded, closer this time, sending a jolt of dread down his spine. "A limited edition Bronze Age All Might keychain? I think we'll take that off your hands for you." He plucked it out of Izuku's hands, and Izuku felt the world stop for a moment as he watched the only way back into his apartment walk away from him, growing farther away as heavy, cold droplets began to fall from the sky. By the time he made it back to his apartment, on the off chance that he'd somehow forgotten to lock the door, the skies had grown black from the storm clouds and a steady downpour had set in. Izuku was soaked and shivering as he tugged the handle of his very much locked door, tears running down his face and mixing with the raindrops. His phone had been soaked from the rain and he couldn't get it to turn on, so he had no way to call his mom, who worked a double shift tonight, and therefore no way of getting back inside. Fortunately, he still had the paper Azawa-sensei gave him with his address and phone number. He carried the paper with him wherever he went, even though he'd long since memorized the words on it. It made him feel safer. It reminded him that he was cared for and that someone had promised to be there for him. Sometimes, when you've been called worthless enough, you start to believe it. It was nice to have someone who didn't think it was true, someone who believed he mattered enough to be saved, even if he still found it hard to believe it. His teacher's words from the other night echoed in his mind. "Call me if you need anything, or even if you don't feel safe. I mean it. No matter what time it is, I'll help." He shook his head, his still damp hair sending tiny water droplets scattering across the bathroom. It was no good dwelling on what his bullies had done. He used the towel to finish drying off, taking extra care around his ribs before putting on the dry clothes. They were soft and warm, a welcome contrast to his soaked apparel, the fabric brushing lightly against his bruised skin. He finished changing and came out holding his damp clothes. Hizashi offered to put them in the dryer, telling him to have a seat while he waited, and Izuku handed them over, settling down on the couch. I was just about to make a pot of tea. Would you like some? It'll warm you up, Hizashi suggested, still grinning brightly. Izuku found himself perplexed by his cheerfulness. Was it real? Was it all for show? Either way, it set his mind on edge. He wasn't used to people acting so nicely around him. It unnerved him in a way that put him on his guard, anxiously waiting to see if he would drop the act. Indecision warred within him. He didn't want him to have to go to any extra effort for him, but if he was already making a pot, it would be rude to not accept, wouldn't it? And he was still so cold. A cup of tea sounded good right now. Ignoring the guilt that wanted to bubble up, he accepted, already anticipating the relief the hot beverage would bring. Hizashi bustled around, boiling the water and pulling out mugs and tea from various cabinets in the kitchen. A gray-striped cat meandered out from the hall. Izuku gave a small gasp. Ozawa-sensei had a cat? That's soap, Hizashi informed him, and Izuku bit back a laugh. He wondered if his no-nonsense sensei had been the one to choose the name. Don't worry, she's friendly. You can pet her if you want. Soap rubbed against his legs, wrapping herself around them. Izuku held his hand out for her to sniff, which she headbutted her head against. He smiled, scratching her head, running his fingers along the soft of her back. She purred, hopping up next to him on the couch. I think she likes you. Hizashi smiled at him. The kettle shrieked and Izuku startled, relaxing once he realized what the sound was, and burying his hands back in the cat's fur. Hizashi went to pull the kettle off the stove. What do you want your tea, kiddo? I have sugar, honey, and milk if you like it. Is oolong tea okay with you? Nodding, Izuku replied, I'd like honey, please, if that's all right. Hizashi carried over 2 cups brimming with ember liquid. Settling in a nearby chair, he held out one of the mugs to Izuku. He reached out and accepted the steaming mug, thanking him. The movement jostled his side the slightest bit, and he inhaled sharply at the stabbing sensation that traveled throughout his chest and abdomen. He clamped his jaw together, holding in a whimper. The tea sloshed dangerously in the mug, and he steadied it. What's the matter, kiddo? He asked, eyebrows tilting up in concern. Are you hurt? He shrugged. The movement made him wince. He tried to cover it by taking a hasty sip of his tea. Each movement sent knives of pain twisting in his side. Shuddering, he sloshed a bit of the hot liquid onto his hands, yelping when it hit his skin. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Hizashi stand, reaching out toward him. He flinched back at the action, sinking into the couch. He clutched the mug to his chest, trying desperately to still the small tremors in his arms. Hizashi froze, heeding Izuku's panicked reaction, his hand stilling midair. I'm sorry, Izuku choked out, ribs screaming from his sudden movement. His eyes flickered wildly around, worried he'd made a mess. He'll get so angry if I did. Sorry, little listener. You don't need to apologize. I didn't mean to scare you, he apologized, sitting back in his chair. I was afraid you'd burn yourself. Nodding slowly, Izuku gave him a quizzical glance, unused to being apologized to. I'm fine, he managed to whisper, dropping his eyes to his hands but still keeping him in his peripheral vision. The man's increased proximity made him nervous. The pain in his ribs made his reaction time slower than normal, making it difficult to even move, and he wished Hizashi would go back to his seat. Izuku knew his injury was obvious, and he didn't like it. Showing this kind of vulnerability made the muscles in his back tighten, the tension working its way up his spine until it reached his neck. It was never safe to be injured around others. It made his stomach knot. The thought of staying here alone, with a virtual stranger, one who could turn on him at any time. His heart pounded as he sat, back pressed into the couch cushion, keeping his eyes carefully trained on the other man as he balanced his tea with his good hand. He doesn't know, he reminded himself. He had no reason to hurt him, he rationalized. He didn't know Izuku was quirkless, and he couldn't find out. After all, it's not like Izuku would be willing to volunteer the information. Wrapping his hands more firmly around the mug, using it to ground himself, he absorbed the heat. He took a sip, letting the warmth seep through him. It had a calming effect, loosening the tension in his muscles and warming him from the inside out. Shota tells me you like to analyze heroes. Do you have a favorite? Hizashi leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. Izuku's head shot up. What? Who's your favorite hero? Hizashi asked again, smiling amicably. I really like All Might, Izuku began. He's so cool and really strong, too. A small smile crept over his face. He is pretty cool, Hizashi acknowledged. I bet you know a lot about him. I love how he always saves people with a smile, Izuku continued, bobbing his head in response. No matter how bad things are, he always makes sure everyone is safe. He bit his lip. Dredging up his courage, he began again. Who's your favorite hero? Hizashi settled back in his chair, smiling softly. Mine's Eraserhead. His eyes widened in wonder. You know who Eraserhead is? It's so hard to learn anything about him since he's an underground hero, which is too bad because he's so awesome. Yes, he smiled, amusement dancing in his eyes. I'm surprised you do. He's one of my favorites, besides All Might, of course, he added. When he first found out that there was a hero who fought mostly quirkless, he'd been ecstatic. For the first time in a long while, he seriously believed that he might be able to become a hero. Despite disencouragement from kids and teachers, every stray Eraserhead photograph or rare bit of security camera footage acted as an encouragement, a reminder that he still had a chance at his dream. He's the best, isn't he? Hizashi agreed with him. They both make me want to be a hero someday, he admitted. You must really admire them. Hizashi looked at him thoughtfully, taking a sip of his tea. I do. Watching them makes me want to be the kind of hero who, when he shows up, makes people feel safe. I want to make it so that people don't have to be afraid when I arrive. That's an admirable goal, kiddo. I think you do a great job of it. You really mean it? Yes, Hizashi insisted. I think you have the potential to be a wonderful hero one day. You've already figured out what the most important part of being a hero is. Protecting others. Even some seasoned pros haven't gotten that down yet. Ozawa-sensei said I could be a hero, he mentioned tentatively. I'm sure he did, Hizashi grinned. Shota never says anything he doesn't mean. Izuku marveled at his answer. He's the first person who ever said that to me. He's a really good teacher. Hizashi nodded. I'm sure he is. They continued talking about heroes as they finished their tea, Izuku rambling excitedly about the latest fight he'd seen or a cool quirk he'd observed. Hizashi listened to everything he said, never rolling his eyes or telling him to be quiet. When their mugs were empty, Hizashi stood and carried them to the kitchen. Izuku felt his eyes starting to get heavy. Ozawa-sensei sure was out late. The pull of sleep became too great to resist, and he let himself drift off, lulled to sleep by the sound of the rain against the windows, with Soap curled up beside him. Nezu smiled at his computer screen. Outside, the rain came down in a heavy torrent, rattling his office windows and making him glad he was still inside. Picking up his phone, he dialed the number he'd finally found after days of searching. He was actually quite impressed. Most civilians didn't bother to cover their tracks so well. Even some of the criminals he'd encountered didn't manage to be this evasive. But when people didn't want to be found, he found they usually did their best to remain that way. The dial tone rang in his ear. Once, twice, 3 times, until it was picked up. "This is Nezu, pro hero and principal of UA. I suppose you know why I'm calling," he said. A sharp intake of breath was all he heard on the other side of the phone for a moment. Finally, a wary voice answered, "Yes, I do." "Good. Best to get straight to the point then. I think we should talk about Elderon Middle School." And that was Chapter 9. Let me know in the comments who you think sent the mystery anonymous letter. And tune in next time to see who it actually was and to see if you were right. This was Station 07.1 Podfix.